Deep Dive, Sable Offshore. Part 1. The Sable Story. Before we go into the Sable Story, let's first explore how these offshore fixed production platforms work. Think of the whole operation as three big stages: the foundation, the extraction, and the processing lab, with a critical pipeline at the end. 1. The foundation. Fixed steel jackets. These aren't floating ships like you see in movies. Platforms Hondo, Harmony, and Heritage are fixed steel jacket structures, basically giant, immovable steel skeletons pinned to the ocean floor. The jacket itself is this huge, open framework tower made of steel legs and cross-bracing. It sits right on the seabed. To lock it in place permanently, they drove enormous steel piles, think giant pipes, hundreds of feet deep straight through the legs into the sediment below. Once pinned like that, the whole thing becomes rock solid. It doesn't bob or sway even in 50-foot Pacific swells or hurricane-force winds. That absolute stability is why they can run 112 wells directly connected to the platform deck with rigid steel risers. No flexible hoses needed. 2. The extraction. Pulling the well stream. Down below the seabed, there's a whole network of 112 wells. Back in the early days, the reservoir pressure was high and oil would rush out. Decades later, that natural drive is mostly gone. So now they use gas lift, a form of artificial lift. They take high-pressure natural gas, pump it back down the wells, where it mixes with the heavy crude. The gas makes the oil lighter and fizzy, almost like carbonating a drink. That buoyancy helps push the mixture all the way to the surface. What actually arrives topside isn't clean oil. It's a hot, high-pressure mess called the well stream. Crude oil plus salty produced water plus natural gas all mixed together. 3. The processing. 3-phase separation. The top side, the part you see above the waterline, is basically a floating chemical plant designed to sort that mess. Everything flows into large, horizontal separation tanks. Gas, lightest, rises to the very top, captured and compressed. Oil floats in the middle layer. Water, heaviest full of salt and sometimes sand, sinks to the bottom. After separation, the produced water gets treated, oil and solids stripped out. Then most of it is re-injected back into the reservoir to help maintain underground pressure. The oil, now much drier and more stable, can be safely pumped through the subsea pipeline to shore. 4. The Transit Las Flores Canyon (LFC) pipeline. This is the make-or-break link. After processing, the oil and gas head through two subsea lines, Line 324 and Line 325, about 8 miles to the Las Flores Canyon onshore facility. At LFC, oil gets desalted and final treated to pipeline/refinery specs. Gas is sweetened, sulfur removed, so it can be sold into the California power grid. Quick side note on the 2015 spill, that leak happened on this very pipeline system. Since then, Sable has installed 27 new emergency shutoff valves and run multiple smart pigs, those robotic inspection tools that crawl inside the pipe, to prove the 35-plus-year-old steel is still sound and safe for high-pressure flow. Since the 2015 incident, integrity management protocols have evolved from reactive maintenance to a proactive, multi-layered defense strategy. This overhaul focuses on a combination of physical hardware upgrades, such as replacing vulnerable segments and installing automated shutoff valves, and advanced diagnostic oversight through smart pig inline inspections. By integrating enhanced corrosion monitoring specifically targeted at corrosion under insulation (CUI), and implementing rigorous hydrostatic spike testing, the current framework aims to identify and eliminate latent structural weaknesses before they can pose a threat to live operations. Right now, the platforms are shifting from static mode, everything shut in, oil just sitting in the pipes, back to dynamic mode. Full production flowing again, roughly $3 million worth of oil per day at current prices. The biggest operational question mark isn't the old reservoir or the platforms themselves. It's whether all those decades-old seals, valves, and fittings can safely handle the sudden return of high-pressure, high-temperature flow without issues. That's the system in a nutshell. All right, let's walk through this diagram together that summarizes the entire process. It's a great visual breakdown of how these fixed offshore production platforms in the Santa Ynez Unit work, from seabed to shore. It's labeled with the 4 main stages: foundation, extraction, processing, and transit. I'll describe what you're seeing section by section. 1. The foundation, fixed steel jackets. On the left you've got the three platforms, Hondo, Harmony, and Heritage, shown as these tall, towering steel structures standing straight up from the ocean floor. These aren't floating. They're fixed steel jackets, basically massive, open framework steel skeletons bolted to the seabed. See those giant legs going down? Those are pinned permanently with steel piles, enormous pipes driven hundreds of feet deep into the sediment below the seabed. That's what makes them rock solid. No swaying in 50-foot Pacific swells or high winds. That immovable stability is key, because it lets them connect all 112 wells directly to the platform deck, using rigid steel risers. No flexible hoses that could fail under movement. 2. The extraction, pulling the well stream. Moving right, the diagram zooms in on the wells themselves. Down in the reservoir, way below the seabed, pressure has dropped after decades of production, so oil doesn't gush out naturally anymore. They use gas lift for artificial lift. High-pressure natural gas gets injected down the wells. See the yellow arrows and lightning bolt symbol. That gas mixes with the heavy crude, making it lighter and fizzy, like bubbles in soda, creating buoyancy that pushes the whole mixture up to the surface. What comes up isn't pure oil, it's this hot, pressurized well stream, a swirling mix of crude oil, salty produced water, and natural gas. The diagram shows it rising through the risers in that orange/yellow flow path. 3. The processing three-phase separation. Topside, on the platform deck above water, it's like a floating chemical refinery. The well stream flows into big horizontal separation tanks, shown as that layered yellow/orange-blue tank. Gravity does the sorting in three phases. Gas, the lightest, rises right to the top, gets captured, compressed, and sent off. Oil floats in the middle layer. Once most water and gas are out, it's drier and stable enough for transport. Orange arrow out. Water heaviest, loaded with salt and sand, sinks to the bottom. Blue layer. It's treated to remove oil/solids, then re-injected back underground to help maintain reservoir pressure. Blue arrow down. 4. The transit, Las Flores Canyon, LFC, pipeline. From there, the processed oil and gas head through subsea pipelines, Line 324 and Line 325, about 8 miles to the onshore Las Flores Canyon facility. At LFC, oil gets desalted and final treated to refinery specs. Gas is sweetened, sulfur stripped out, so it can feed into the California power grid. The bottom right flags the critical stuff. After the 2015 spill on this same pipeline system, Sable Offshore Corp installed 27 new emergency shutoff valves and ran multiple smart pigs, those robotic inspection tools that crawl inside the pipe, to confirm the 35-plus-year-old steel is still sound. Now the whole setup is shifting from static mode, everything shut in, oil sitting in pipes, to dynamic mode, full flow restarting, potentially worth around $3 million a day at current prices. The big operational red flag? Those aging seals, valves, and fittings. Can they handle the sudden slam of high-pressure, high-temperature flow without leaking or failing? That's the full workflow in one graphic. Immovable foundation, gas-lifted extraction, topside separation, and shore-bound transit, with some serious safety and restart drama layered on top. So that's the nuts and bolts of how these platforms pull oil from the seabed, process it topside, and get it ready to ship to shore. Now let's zoom out and talk about what all this actually means in the bigger picture, because the story around Sable Offshore Corp isn't just about rusty pipes and gas lift anymore. It's become one of the most complicated, high-stakes turnaround plays in the entire U.S. energy space right now. The saga of Sable Offshore Corp represents one of the most intricate and high-stakes special situations in the modern energy sector, characterized by a collision between legacy industrial infrastructure, evolving environmental jurisprudence, and the opportunistic deployment of distressed capital. Platforms Hondo, Harmony, Heritage plotted offshore, label 3-mile state waters line and federal OCS waters beyond it. Draw subsea flow lines from platforms to Las Flores Canyon, LFC, onshore facility. Show lines 324 and 325 running from LFC inland. Note, formerly 901 900/3. Highlight the tilde 8-mile offshore to LFC segment and the tilde 4 mile coastal segment on state lands/state parks easement as a red regulatory choke point. Offshore production is federally governed. The onshore coastal segments create the permitting bottleneck. At the center of this maelstrom lies the Santa Ynez Unit, SYU, a world-class offshore oil and gas development located in federal waters off the coast of Santa Barbara County, California, comprising 3 massive platforms, Hondo, Harmony, and Heritage, and the onshore Las Flores Canyon, LFC, processing facility. The asset base possesses the theoretical capacity to produce over 45,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day. But how much is that really? At 45,000 barrels a day, this asset is a rounding error versus major public E&Ps. It's approximately 1/45th of ConocoPhillips, approximately 1/75th of BP, and roughly 1/95 to 100th of Exxon or Chevron. The log scale shows it clearly sits in small producer territory, meaningfully larger than a single well or micro E&P, but nowhere near integrated or even large independent scale. Against countries, 45,000 barrels per day is negligible. It's approximately 1/20th of Venezuela, approximately 1/90th of Iraq, approximately 1/110th of Canada, and approximately 1/200th of Saudi Arabia, Russia, or the US. This frames the number correctly: material for a single asset or niche operator, immaterial in any national or global supply context. In plain terms, at 45,000 barrels a day, refers to the combined peak production of the entire Santa Ynez Unit when all 3 platforms and the Las Flores Canyon facility were fully operating. It is not a per well or per platform number. Taken together, that output level is a reasonable historical benchmark for the full SYU at capacity and is the reference point behind Sable's current production expectations. The SYU targets the Hondo, Pescado, and Zacate fields, located in the western portion of the Santa Barbara Channel. These fields tap into the Monterey Formation, a geological stratum famous for its prolific but challenging hydrocarbon reserves. The crude oil produced here is generally heavy, low API gravity, and sour, high sulfur content, necessitating sophisticated heating and processing infrastructure to ensure flow assurance and marketability. The location is physically benign in terms of weather, protected from the open Pacific swell by the Channel Islands, but politically volatile, lying adjacent to the Gaviota Coast, a region with a rich history of environmental activism and strict land use controls. The reserves are substantial. Prior to the 2015 shutdown, the unit was a cornerstone of California's domestic energy supply. Even after a decade of dormancy, the reservoir pressure remains sufficient to support free-flowing wells, as evidenced by the restart tests on Platform Harmony in May 2025, which achieved rates of approximately 6,000 barrels per day from just 6 wells. That's like restarting a long-idle factory and having 6 machines alone produce the output of a small oil field, roughly 1 full modern offshore platform's worth of production coming from a handful of wells. In everyday terms, approximately 6,000 barrels per day is enough oil to fuel over 300,000 cars every single day, from just 6 wells that had been shut for nearly a decade. Restart risk is nonlinear after a decade shut-in. The May 2025 Harmony test, approximately 6,000 barrels per day from just 6 wells, is a strong proof of life signal, but it does not guarantee a smooth return across all 112 wells. Some wellbores may require workovers due to scale, sand, valve reliability, or flowline restrictions, and ramping can be volatile. Early flush rates can fade as pressure normalization, water cut, and lift optimization settle into a steadier decline curve. The operational reality is usually phased reactivation, prioritizing the highest confidence wells first, while diagnosing underperformers and managing facility constraints. The offshore operations of the Santa Ynez Unit, SYU, are anchored by 3 integrated platforms situated in federal waters on the Outer Continental Shelf, OCS, a designation beginning 3 nautical miles from the coastline. This geographic positioning is the cornerstone of Sable's legal strategy. By operating beyond the state's boundary, the extraction activity falls under the exclusive jurisdiction of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, OCSLA, and federal agencies like BOE and BSE. By establishing that production is governed by federal law rather than state oversight, Sable effectively silos California's regulatory leverage to the onshore and coastal interfaces, such as pipeline easements and export pathways, while insulating the offshore production itself from state-level interference. Platform Hondo, the pioneer. Platform Hondo is the oldest and most proximate facility in the Triad. Hondo is located approximately 5.1 miles offshore in the Santa Barbara Channel, a position in federal waters that underpins Sable's argument that its operations fall under interstate commerce. Installed in 1976, Hondo is an 8-leg jacket platform standing in 842 feet of water with capacity for 28 well slots. It functions as the primary gathering hub for the eastern portion of the field and was the first platform to begin production in 1981, ultimately producing nearly 190 million barrels of oil and 425 billion cubic feet of gas. Now approaching 50 years of service, Hondo also carries the highest integrity risk among the offshore assets. The submerged steel jacket requires continuous cathodic protection to prevent corrosion, and the topside processing equipment, largely dating to the late 1970s, faces obsolescence challenges that add complexity to the restart effort. Platform Harmony, the deepwater hub. Platform Harmony represents a generational leap in offshore engineering compared with Hondo, and sits at the center of Sable's restart strategy. Located roughly 6.4 miles offshore in the Santa Barbara Channel, Harmony extends into much deeper water and reflects a later era of platform design. Installed in June 1989, it stands in approximately 1,198 feet of water, making it one of the deepest conventional fixed platforms ever built on the U.S. West Coast. The structure is substantially larger than Hondo, with 60 well slots and a multi-level modular deck configuration. Operationally, Harmony is the logistical and technical hub of the restart effort. It hosted the May 2025 well tests that demonstrated reservoir viability and is equipped with advanced gas compression and treating systems specifically designed to manage the high hydrogen sulfide content of production from the Pescado field. Platform Heritage, the Western Outpost. Platform Heritage is the westernmost outpost of the Santa Ynez Unit, targeting the Zacate and Pescado fields and located roughly 8 miles offshore in the Santa Barbara Channel. Installed in 1980, Heritage stands in approximately 1,075 feet of water and closely mirrors Platform Harmony in scale, with capacity for 60 well slots. Strategically, Heritage provides access to reserves that cannot be reached from the other platforms, making it essential to full field development. Its production is tied back to Harmony via subsea pipelines laid along the ocean floor, and these subsea connections introduce a distinct risk profile. They are far more difficult to inspect, monitor, and repair than topside equipment, creating maintenance and integrity challenges that differ materially from those faced at the surface facilities. The technical evolution and physical scale of the unit are defined by the progression from the 1976 installation of Platform Hondo to the 1989 editions of Harmony and Heritage. While Hondo operates in 842 feet of water with 28 well slots, the newer deepwater platforms, Harmony and Heritage, stand in depths of up to 1,198 feet and offer 60 well slots each. Spanning a distance of 5 to 8 miles offshore, these three structures have combined to produce hundreds of millions of barrels of oil, serving integrated roles in extraction, compression, and gathering. That offshore system, however, represents only the front end of a tightly coupled production chain. Offshore platforms can drill, complete, and initially separate hydrocarbons, but they cannot deliver a saleable product on their own. The economic viability of the Santa Ynez Unit depends on moving production from the platforms to a centralized onshore facility capable of handling the complexity of the reservoir's output. High water cut, sediments, and significant concentrations of sour gas make untreated production unsafe and unmarketable. As a result, the offshore infrastructure is functionally inseparable from the onshore processing system that conditions the hydrocarbons to meet refinery and pipeline specifications. Onshore processing. The Las Flores Canyon LFC facility. The hydrocarbons extracted offshore are unmarketable in their raw state. They contain water, sediments, and lethal concentrations of sour gas. The fluid stream is transported via subsea pipelines to the Las Flores Canyon, LFC, processing facility tucked into a canyon on the Gaviota coast. Processing capabilities. LFC is a massive industrial complex designed to separate the three-phase flow: oil, gas, water. It dehydrates the crude to refinery specifications and sweetens the natural gas by removing sulfur. Power generation. A critical feature of LFC is its cogeneration plant. The facility uses a portion of the produced natural gas to fire turbines that generate electricity. This power is used to run the facility and is transmitted via subsea cables to the offshore platforms to power the drilling rigs and lift pumps. Excess power is sold into the California grid, providing a secondary, albeit minor, revenue stream. Storage constraints. The facility includes storage tanks for the treated crude. However, storage is finite. During the May 2025 testing, Sable produced oil into these tanks until they reached capacity. Without an export route, the pipeline, production had to cease. This physical bottleneck highlights the absolute necessity of the pipeline restart. Without it, LFC is merely a storage terminal with no outlet. The logistical umbilical. The Las Flores pipeline system. The entire SYU complex relies on a single artery to reach the market: the Las Flores pipeline system. This system consists of two primary segments: Line 324, formerly Line 901, a 2.4-inch diameter insulated pipeline that transports crude oil from LFC to the Sisquoc pump station. This is the specific line that ruptured in the 2015 Refugio spill. Line 325, formerly Line 903, a 3.0-inch diameter pipeline that continues from Sisquoc to the Pentland delivery point in Kern County. These pipelines are insulated with polyurethane foam and tape wrap to maintain the temperature of the viscous crude oil, ensuring it remains fluid enough to pump. This specific insulation design has become the system's Achilles heel. Flow assurance is an underrated restart variable for SYU's heavy, sour crude. Viscosity rises rapidly as temperature drops, so stable transport depends on temperature management, insulation integrity, heating where applicable, disciplined restart procedures, and operational controls that prevent cooling-induced throughput loss or plugging risks. Any degradation in insulation, heat tracing, or temperature control systems increases restart fragility, especially during low-flow conditions, because heavy crude becomes harder to move exactly when the system is most vulnerable. These assets have remained largely dormant, shut in, since the catastrophic Refugio oil spill in May 2015, creating a decade-long hiatus that has degraded physical integrity and hardened regulatory opposition. Since the 2015 Refugio spill, the response has focused on removing the original failure mechanism and making the pipeline inspectable and defensible under modern standards. The first image shows direct excavation of the onshore pipeline, where sections were uncovered, insulation removed, and damaged pipe cut out and replaced. This work addressed the core problem revealed by the spill: corrosion hidden beneath polyurethane foam insulation that trapped moisture against the steel and prevented visual inspection. By exposing the pipe, operators were able to identify wall loss, repair affected segments, and pressure test the system well above normal operating limits. The second image illustrates the pipeline's insulation design: steel pipe surrounded by polyurethane foam and an outer protective sheath, with an ORM, online corrosion monitoring system, embedded inside. Since 2015, this design has been systematically mitigated through targeted insulation removal, enhanced corrosion monitoring, smart pig inspections, and stricter integrity management plans. The goal was not to redesign the entire system, but to prove that the insulation-related corrosion risk could be detected, managed, and prevented rather than hidden. This remediation effort resolves the engineering question, but it exposes the real one. With the physical failure mode addressed and the pipeline repaired and tested, the remaining barrier to restart is no longer technical. It is regulatory authority and legal jurisdiction, which determines whether a repaired pipeline is allowed to operate at all. This shift from engineering to authority reframes the entire debate. Once the physical integrity of the system was addressed, the fate of the asset ceased to be a question of safety or operability and became a question of who has the legal power to decide whether the pipeline may restart. The investment thesis is therefore predicated on a binary outcome: the successful restart of the Las Flores pipeline system, lines 324 and 325, and the unlocking of substantial free cash flow from assets acquired at a fraction of their replacement cost. The investment thesis is predicated on a binary outcome: the successful restart of the Las Flores pipeline system, lines 324 and 325, and the subsequent unlocking of substantial free cash flow from assets acquired at a fraction of their replacement cost. However, as of January 2026, this thesis faces an existential threat. Following a precipitous 75% collapse in equity value from when Lilu bought it, is driven by a federal court admission that the onshore pipelines remain inactive and thus subject to draconian new state permitting requirements under California Senate Bill 237, SB 237. Sable Offshore stands at a precipice. This report provides an exhaustive analysis of the physical, legal, and financial dimensions of Sable Offshore. It explores the technical specifications of the stranded assets, the metallurgical and operational implications of an 11-year shutdown, the complex jurisdictional war between the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, and the California Coastal Commission, CCC, and the precarious financial structure that now threatens the company's solvency. Before we get there, we have to ask, so why did Exxon sell off Sable in the first place? To understand the current crisis, you have to understand that Sable Offshore Corp did not begin as a typical oil company. It began as a high-stakes financial vehicle designed specifically to solve a problem that a global giant like ExxonMobil simply couldn't fix. The SPAC origins Flame Acquisition Corp. The story of Sable is inextricably linked to the world of blank check companies. In early 2024, the entity we now call Sable was born from a merger with Flame Acquisition Corp., a special-purpose acquisition company, SPAC, led by industry veteran James C. Flores. Flores is no stranger to the Santa Barbara Channel. He previously led Plains Exploration and Production, which had deep roots in California offshore. He formed Flame with a singular, audacious thesis: that a lean, aggressive, independent operator could navigate the regulatory graveyard of California, where a multi-billion-dollar major like Exxon had failed. The transaction valued the pro forma entity at approximately $883 million. It was a zombie deal from the start. Exxon didn't just sell the assets, they effectively became the bank, providing 97% of the financing through a $625 million senior secured term loan. Why Exxon walked away? For decades, the Santa Ynez Unit was Exxon's crown jewel in the U.S., producing oil for as little as $16 per barrel. However, following the 2015 Refugio spill, the math changed. Exxon spent 7 years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to restart the unit, but they were met with a wall of political and legal resistance. By the time Exxon exited, the financial damage was already locked in. Public filings and reporting show Exxon took multi-billion-dollar impairment charges, roughly $2.6 billion, largely tied to the prolonged shutdown of the Santa Ynez Unit and the failure to restart it. Those write-downs reflected years of engineering work, regulatory compliance, litigation, and carrying costs with no viable path forward. In effect, Exxon concluded that continuing to fight for a restart would only compound losses, while the asset's future value was being steadily eroded by politics rather than geology or economics. Exxon realized that as a global multinational, they were a lightning rod for environmental litigation. They faced two insurmountable hurdles. 1. The trucking denied when Santa Barbara County blocked their plan to truck oil to refineries to bypass the broken pipeline. Exxon saw the writing on the wall. 2. The decommissioning bill. The Titans, Hondo, Harmony, and Heritage were approaching the end of their lives. The cost to remove these structures and plug the wells is estimated at over $500 million. By selling to Sable, Exxon attempted a strategic liability handoff. They outsourced the regulatory street fight to Jim Flores while maintaining a massive financial stake through their loan. The binary bet and the reversion clause. The most critical part of this history is the reversion clause embedded in the sale. Exxon didn't just hand over the keys, they set a ticking clock. If Sable failed to restart production by a specific date, originally set for late 2025 and later pushed into early 2026, the assets would revert back to Exxon for zero compensation. Please note, the Sable situation has two separate, easily confused clocks: the asset reversion clock and the debt maturity clock. The reversion clause was the original binary threat. If Sable failed to restart production by a set deadline, initially late 2025, later pushed into early 2026, the assets would revert to Exxon for zero compensation, wiping out equity outright. That risk has effectively passed due to extensions and regulatory progress. What remains is the 2027 clock, which is not about losing the assets, but about surviving financially. The Exxon note matures on March 31, 2027, or 90 days after first oil sales, meaning Sable must either generate cash flow fast enough or refinance on acceptable terms, with dilution as the main danger rather than automatic forfeiture. This created a binary outcome for investors. If the pipeline restarts, the company unlocks billions in value. If it doesn't, the equity is wiped out and the scrap metal returns to Exxon. Whether the upside or the wipeout occurs does not hinge on sentiment, oil prices, or capital markets. It hinges on a single question: can an oil transportation system that failed catastrophically and then sat dormant for more than a decade be brought back online without failing again? This is Avi. Like and subscribe. On to the next.